My name is Bobby. I'm retired Army Master Sergeant, 17 years. I served in the Military Police Corps. Did 2 tours in Iraq. I was wounded on 21 August 2006. There was a suicide truck bomb with about 200 tanks of propane. It was drove to the front gate of our entry control point to the location, and there was a suicide bomber who self-detonated it. I was severely wounded. I sustained burns of 40% of my upper body, and that pretty much ended my Army career. I think the hardest thing was that I was still on active duty, and it was difficult for me to grasp the fact that I was the one wounded and trying to figure out like where my purpose was in the Army, in the service. And there was nobody who could really answer those questions. That culminated by dealing with my family and being able to adapt, to my situation, as well as trying to decide what I was going to do with my future. For my recovery, I think it was probably easier than some of the people because I had physical wounds that kind of distracted me. 60% of my time was spent taking care of my physical wounds. Having the physical wounds to tell me and remind me that, I was injured was helpful, but also between that and, daily distractions of trying to get the military to help us as wounded soldiers, to help us recover, as well as trying to figure out what I was going to do, it took a lot out of me. That was probably the hardest part of my life, at least my entire adult life, trying to deal with, the emotional impact of that on me, as well as, how it was affecting my family because I had 2 small kids. I think that the biggest step was knowing that I needed the help. There's all the precursors going to it, like, breaking down and being depressed and, having emotional fits that you just can't control, things like that, and then rage and things. But the biggest thing was knowing and accepting the fact that I needed help, and then being able to go get the help. If my wife hadn't drugged me to the hospital, I probably wouldn't have made it because I was pretty much at the lowest point that I probably could in my entire life. And once she brought me to the hospital, I found somebody that I could trust, in the mental health field. The biggest thing was trusting the person I was talking to. I started with individual counseling, and I had a great therapist from the start. When I was going through the individual therapy, my wife was kind of getting educated on what to expect, what they thought to expect. So while she was getting educated, she would educate my son and my daughter. And, they had certain things that they would expect. Okay, this is why dad's doing this, or this is why dad's doing that, even though I couldn't still get the concept of the whole thing. There were certain triggers. I mean, there's still triggers now after 5 years that I find myself getting caught up on sometimes. It gets better, but it never goes away. So it's one of those things you have to work at every day. The first big thing is dealing and learning to be a civilian yourself and not a soldier anymore. And then the second thing is trying to integrate into the civilian workforce. I think the biggest problem or heartache right now is that we're not, our experience and our abilities don't relate to a resume. And civilians rely on the resume, and they rely on college degrees. And some of them don't take the time to realize that military personnel have more life experience and ability and skill than somebody, maybe with a 4-year degree that has no workforce experience or no worldly experience. So that's one of the biggest hurdles, is trying to explain that to people and getting the opportunity in the door. I mean, even civilians have problems trying to get their foot in the door for an interview, but for a soldier, it's 10 times harder, because if you ask a guy who's only been in the Army a couple of years how to explain what he did in the Army to a civilian, perspective, it's almost impossible. There's a lot of guys out there who speak and advocate on soldiers' behalf, whether they're on active duty or they're veterans. I've even found that talking to guys from Vietnam is helpful for me and for them, regardless of how old they are, how young they are. If they've been to combat, they can relate to what I went through, and they can relate to how I feel because they obviously have the same emotions. The most important thing probably is to just not be afraid to talk about it. You got to be willing, if you're going to go get the help or find the help, be willing to talk about things that make you uncomfortable. The most important thing is to admit that you have a problem that you can't fix, and to ask for help. I've fired 5 counselors before, just because their style didn't work. But I didn't give up. I knew that there had to be somebody out there that could relate to me as well as help me out in my recovery. And I think the biggest thing is just once you say you want help, is not to give up. You know, use a soldier mentality and don't quit when you're trying to, you know, get better and make yourself better, because it's gonna benefit you in the long run. Right.